Thank you very much. So, hello everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is Matthew Finkel, and I work at the Tor Project on Tor browser. And today I will be talking about the very exciting topic of IP addresses, more specifically how they're used, and in some cases why they should be. This presentation is based on some work that is happening within the review of paired G within the IRTF. We have an initial draft, but it is still very much a work in progress. And so the presentation today will first talk a little bit about IP addresses, and then how they're used, why we care how they're used, and what we can do about it. So just to start off, what is an IP address? In general, it is just an identifier. It identifies devices on a network. It facilitates communication between devices on the network, and it can largely be thought of in one of a number of ways, but we can think of it as either something similar to your home address, where the IP address is equivalent to sending a piece of mail to your home, or it could be something even more specific than your home. It could be like your personal mobile number, so something like sending an SMS to your mobile number. But in some other cases, it can even be significantly less specific, and it may only provide information like something akin to your country code. So there's a wide range of use cases for IP addresses, and it's how specific it is really depends on how that address is assigned. And so how are they used? A lot of the use case is actually within kind of the trust and safety area. So it's used for anomaly detection, anti-spam, anti-abuse, anti-fraud, reputation. What assumptions can you make about an incoming connection? And I don't know. There are likely many other use cases that I don't personally know about, and we are in the process of learning how these are used, so we can think about how whether those are valid use cases and if there are alternatives. These addresses are also used in other ways which aren't necessarily so benevolent, which is, in some cases, cross-site linkability. Tracking is a significant problem on the web today, and IP addresses generally provide a semi-stable identifier. So as, say, a third party on two different websites, if you see a connection from the same IP address, then you can have some assurance that it is actually the same user that is making both connections. And then IP addresses are also used for geographical information. Either if, say, you're a news site and you want to localize content to someone, then that geographical information can give you that information, but also geofencing, and that comes into play in politics in many cases. And if as a company you are required to restrict or change the information that you provide to users depending on local laws, then geofencing helps you meet those requirements. So why do we care? From Tor's perspective, obviously, privacy is a hugely important aspect of this, but also more generally, going back to tracking, that is a concern for everyone on the web, and the ability for destinations to learn more about their users than those users want the destination to learn is a problem. And so it should be revealing information about yourself should be opt-in. And because IP addresses are passive, that they are built into the underlying protocol, it's not possible for a typical user to obtain IP privacy. And so this is one area that we want to look at. We also care about because of security. If you're at, if we take the typical example, if you're at some cafe that has an open Wi-Fi network and you don't trust it, then maybe you enable a VPN, and this provides you some level of security because you have at least a little bit more assurance that your traffic is not being intercepted or you're not receiving manipulated DNS responses, so on and so forth. And so the VPN provides you some level of security, but now from the service provider's perspective, you are connecting from a different IP address, and that IP address doesn't reflect you or necessarily your behavior, but the behavior of everyone else who is using that service. And so, as mentioned earlier, IP address reputation has its purposes, but it's also not always correct. And then, of course, we just have the general problem of surveillance and tracking, and privacy is a human right, and the fact that this data, this metadata is available and leaked, it calls into question, what changes can we make to protect everyone? And just generally, metadata is something that we need to take seriously. But also, why do we care? Well, we care because IP addresses are they're a usability problem. If for services that rely too much on IP addresses and IP reputation, and they make using the web very difficult when the incoming connection that they see has a bad reputation, or if they are concerned about the type of traffic that they're receiving. So how do we fix this? Well, we don't really know. This is, as I said earlier, that this is still very early work and still being developed. But maybe in some cases we can find replacement signals for IP addresses, particularly around the idea of reputation. Are there different reputation signals that can replace IP addresses? So these services aren't looking at the IP address itself, but that they get a reputation signal that is more linked to the actual user and not just some larger group. And then maybe we can even go further and look at a more general purpose reputation system, and not a reputation system that is developed in-house by a lot of different orgs. So going back to the original use cases, why is this hard? Well, it's hard because we haven't found alternative solutions for all of these issues. And then there's also the typical question of, if we remove IP addresses from these situations and these use cases, what happens? What if there's an attack of some sort and we lose that signal, we lose that information? How do we react? How do we maintain the same level of security and privacy in other aspects of the internet and web if we replace IP addresses with something else? And with that, this is my contact information, and I am interested in hearing more about the use cases that you see for IP addresses and how you use them, and if you have ideas about how we can replace them.